update on revenues and the Spending Affordability Committee. And we have Dr. Holly Sun, who will be participating in that part of our meeting today. And Dr. Sun, I'm going to ask you to start with a financial update to the extent that you know anything yet. I assume that you have at least some information on what is going on regarding how COVID will impact our, at least somewhat, know how COVID will impact our financial situation here in Howard County, and I think that it would be really helpful if you could fill in the county council on those issues.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and Council Chair. Yeah, I'll be happy to give you a quick update. It's probably more of conceptual discussion rather than numbers because there are a lot of uncertainties, but we do have plenty of information to share at this point. First, for last fiscal year, FY20, it's a pretty strange situation. While the county, as a lot of other cities and states, there went through significant economic stress there, our revenue actually come up surprisingly strong, but it's all primarily driven by one-time factors. I don't have numbers to share because our finance department is working closely with consultants, actually even over the weekend, to produce a CAFR. So I will save to avoid mentioning something that's not an audited number. That should be available probably in the next few weeks on that. But what I can say is that we closed the year extremely strong, but that's not a reflection of economic reality because, as I just indicated, it's primarily driven by one-time temporary factors. For example, our income tax was experienced a huge increase while our unemployment rate tripled in that period of time. Why is that? Our discussion with State Controller's Office, we did a few in the last couple of months, is that number one, the county received some one-time TCJA reconciliation funding, which is a lagged impact or lagged reconciliation for federal tax law change 2 years ago. And that's more than $35 million. It's one time, it's not to be repeated. So that's what happened. The second thing is everybody believes through talking with State Controller's Office is that the first round of federal stimulus package has played an incredibly critical role in holding local and state economy, at least when it reflects the revenue, at least on temporary basis. For example, previously back in May, I think the state hired 2 different consulting firms to make projections about the fiscal outlook. At that point, the projection is during the first several months of the pandemic, the personal income will likely have a 6 to 7% drop from the pre-pandemic level. Now their updated estimate for that period of time, partially based on actual data, was actually showing 6 to 7% higher than pre-pandemic level. And the general guess or educated guess is because the very strong federal stimulus, as you recall, there are direct cash check to individuals, there are paycheck protection programs there to the business, as well as unemployment insurance, extended program, including $600 per week actual amount. So all those has been helped holding the revenue from dropping on a temporary basis. But again, these are initial stage. We know there are huge uncertainties there going forward, not only related to the pandemic itself there, because we have been seeing the data actually not going in the right direction when it comes to the pandemic. We see essentially the spike recently in state and also nationwide, which is going to impact economic activities in terms of when and how fast the economic recovery will happen. But very importantly, what's going to happen on the federal second round of stimulus package, whether it's going to be quick enough, how sizable it is it going to continue to provide some help to both residents, business, and actually local government as well. These are all have huge uncertainty there. That's why we actually still have to use a lot of caution and frankly have a lot of uncertainties hanging there. The interesting things recently, I said I talked with Controller's Office a few times. I also have been get together with a few most seasonal forecasters and budget directors in the state. I myself belong to that group. And we discussed all kinds of possibilities. And at the end of the day, we reached a consensus is we don't know, which sounds ridiculous, but that's what's happening because there are so many unknown factors that can bring things up or down. But one thing to be certain is some of the temporarily good data are attributable to one-time factors. Some of them are already gone, as you know, the unemployment insurance, some of those stimulus packages already gone. So we really are keeping an eye on everything and try to keep everybody posted and make needed adjustment going forward. So that's where we are. The other thing is that I think I forgot to mention is that it's not very good. Is there are some revenues didn't hit FY20 too much because a lagging impact. So, for example, recordation and the transfer tax, they actually, the first couple of months in the pandemic period, some of us actually were holding pretty well, even still show some increase, probably because the transactions or deals were already in the pipeline, takes time to generate to finish actual transactions there. They started to show up in the tail end of FY20, some of the signs of weakening. And in fact, in the last quarter in FY21, recordation tax has shown double-digit decrease. Transfer tax also have about 9% drop. And hotel motel tax, unfortunately, has been almost half a year now struggling with double-digit decrease. So we are fundamentally, we still see a lot of problem as the job growth is not there. We still have high unemployment, high number of new unemployment, insurance claims. And if you talk with business, a lot of business are still struggling. They're not regain ground yet, and some actually may not coming back, may not be coming back. So these are still struggling. But how does that transfer the actual revenue projection going forward? That's a part we are still working with everybody and try to keep an eye on that. What I will say that going forward, I would think that we will still have a lot of challenges there because, again, federal stimulus, for example, that we don't know when that's going to happen and we don't know what is going to provide direct support to local governments. But we know the needs are there, or local communities, no matter it's residents or business impacted by the current economic environment, are still in need of our services there. So I'll just pause there and I'll be happy to answer questions here.
Okay. Council colleagues, I see Councilmember Rigby has her hand up. Yes.
So one of the things that I was just wondering about that you hadn't touched on yet was if we know how the state's going to be treating the public school enrollment, because if they are counting sort of if they keep it sort of the way they've been doing it, then it's really going to sort of set us back moving forward, and it's going to be even harder for the schools to recover. So I wondered what you'd heard at the state level about their funding formulas and how they'll be treating the school systems.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's really a good question. It's not decided yet based on my knowledge, but it has been in discussion because you're absolutely right. A lot of schools in Maryland have been experiencing a decrease of student enrollment because of the pandemic. So I know they have been conversation actually between different school system and the state, and also state legislatures regarding whether a decision or legislative action will be taken to keep MOE at no, not to avoid negative. So in other words, but that's still are in the process of discussion. I don't know whether any decision. I don't think any decision has been made on that. If I have to make a guess, I think it's possible that a legislation could be endorsed to avoid MOE be a negative number. But again, it's very early. Again, it's going to be a state legislative decision. But that's very true. I think it's definitely in discussion.
Well, as a follow-up to Councilmember Rigby's question, I assume that you're aware of the drop in the number of students from the school district. Okay. And have you looked yet at what the financial consequences would have if that if the state legislation doesn't pass?
We haven't received the number. We tried, and we heard from the staff that they are still waiting for the state to verify the number. So we haven't got the official number yet. But anecdotally, we did learn from them it's a decrease.
Okay. So I know she just turned off her camera, but Councilmember Walsh, I know that you have to leave fairly quickly. I don't know if you had some questions before you had to get off camera, or there you are.
No, thanks. No, and you're right. I'm signing off now.
Okay, didn't mean to point that out to everybody, but but those things happen.
Thank you, Dr. Sun.
Yes, and I did want to give you an opportunity before you had to go. Okay.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. So I do have a couple more questions. I was wondering if you think that that COVID will have an impact on the assessable base. I guess particularly the commercial base, possibly.
That's another good question.
Yeah, possibly the
and there are different
homeowners
opinions.
base, but if we're closing down commercial businesses, we're not closing them down, but if commercial businesses are closing down, I would assume that their assessable base would also be going south.
Yeah, that's also a very good question. A few things. One is that actually even during the early time of the pandemic period, there are some national association for cities, counties has been anticipating that for any jurisdiction who have property tax, they are likely to see the impact gradually emerging in the coming multiple years rather than immediately, because the nature of assessment, it takes time to get to transfer into assessable base. And in Maryland, due to the phasing, it's also delayed the potential impact on that. So some of this we may not see immediately in a significant manner, but down the road they could be quite some possibility there. It's both commercial, real property base, and also personal property tax, which is basically for business equipment. And the other thing is going to be interesting to watch is how business transfer in the way they function. As you can tell, like a lot of business learn that they don't have to have those virtual space there, not virtual, the physical space there in order to function in at least for multiple of their functions there. So down the road, does that mean that some of the office space, some of the malls, traditional malls, would that be facing some stress going forward? That's a kind of big question there. So again, a lot of this will not likely happen overnight, but given time, that would likely transfer to some of the, I would say, potential decrease or some slowdown in those growth for those accessible base. But that's a very good question. I think that is likely happen. It's just more likely to be gradually. That's my personal guess, rather than very sharply right away.
So, Dr. Sun, how do you build that into the budget? I mean, what, do you just say, well, okay, we know that things are still looking a little down and that it may not, the commercial businesses may not come back as strong as we hope, no matter what. Let's just say even with the vaccine, that some of the businesses just can't come back because they don't have the capital to rejuvenate themselves. Do you then just say, okay, well, we'll forecast 5% less in the commercial sector that we'll be collecting on personal property tax and on real property tax? Or do you get together with
Yeah.
I'm just
Pretty-
wondering, how do you go
yeah.
about doing this? Do you get together with your forecasting group and?
Pretty, Tyrion, I think it's very similar to what you just described. We have to come up with certain assumptions, and sometimes we have to come up with scenarios because it's very hard to see which scenarios will be the final. But we are going to be in conversation with the business community as well as State Department assessment taxation. But even then, frankly speaking, I think that the data they have will be very limited. A lot of this also educated guess on that, but we were building some of such potential impact in our long-term modeling, internal projections, and try to account for that. How accurate on that, it's hard to tell because a lot of data wouldn't emerge until after fact, basically. But you're right, we were going to build in some of that in our projections. The one thing to point it out is when we talk about uncertainties there, just now we talked about state projection. The state has hired 2 different consulting firms in May and September. Both times roll out 2 different scenarios. These scenarios are hugely different, and it basically tells how uncertain people are. From all well-known economists, they have very different thoughts, and their own thoughts change over time regarding what will likely happen in the future. But one thing is that I want to point it out, all the different scenarios the state has are still assuming in terms of employment level for the state, are still assuming between 2 to 4 years to regain the employment level pre-pandemic. So we're just saying that even the most optimistic one basically saying that they're anticipating at least takes 2 years to go back to pre-pandemic level. So that was telling me that people are not looking at a quick V-shaped rebound, anything go back very soon. Thanks.
So do you know what the unemployment level is right now in Howard County?
I think it's about 5.2%. It's basically 2 times the pre-pandemic level. At the peak during the summer, it's 8.1. I think that's more than 3 times of the pre-pandemic level. But again, going forward, it really depends on what's going to happen. For those who haven't been fortunate enough to find a job yet, their unemployment insurance has been drying out or that's high compared to a few months ago. So it's really dependent on what's going to happen at the federal level as well as how fast the local economy could start to see some rebound, and hopefully keep fingers crossed that pandemic, the second wave, is not going to go out of control.
Okay, are there any questions, any other questions? I guess my last question would be, at what point do you think that you will have some more information that you would be able to share with us prior to giving us the budget? I just think it would be good, especially this year, to have some heads up before we get the budget so that we are prepared for what may be coming down the road.
Okay. I think there's 2 opportunities, I would say. One is that by January, we should have the State Department Assessment Taxation's preliminary projection of next year's assessable base. And also, at that point, we know at least some income tax distribution first quarter data. So that probably gave us an opportunity to look at that. Then we might come out with very preliminary. That's preliminary first round of projections at that point. And then when it's we're meeting with spending for the committee, and In that period of time, by the way, we also have a contracted consultant that's going to provide us some preliminary projection for personal income level. That's usually get available by early February-ish. So that's get built into the March 1st spending for the committee projections on that. So, and usually that committee will come in front of the council to provide a briefing in March. So I would say January and March, that's a time that I think you'll get a chance to hear about the revenue if you want us to come back there before the budget get rolled out.
Okay. Mr. Youngman, you're very quiet over there. Also, we can't see your face. Did we ever figure that out? What was going on, why we can't get him on video? Oh, there you are.
I can see him.
Oh, okay, sorry. You were just so dark. You're under an odd shadow here.
Yeah, it is weird.
Yeah.
Your light looks the same as mine. I don't have any questions.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I know finance is one of your favorite things.
It is. I don't have any questions for Holly, though.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And council colleagues, doesn't look like there are any other questions. Dr. Jones?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Councilmember Rigby?
No, I'm all right for now. I'm appreciative that you guys are getting the spending affordability committee started early, considering all of the challenges we're going to face.
Well, that takes us right into the next topic. So thank you for saying that, because the next topic is the Spending Affordability Committee. And I think you are still up, Dr. Sun. So if you could tell us why you're getting it started early.
Sure.
Why you changed the people you did on the committee, who's on the committee, what you were looking for in terms of background with people on the committee, and what you're planning to do with them this year.
Sure. Thank you. Just for sake of the audience, the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee is a resident advisory board that was established by executive order to bring in essentially nonpartisan, data-driven type of analysis and to advise county executive on next year's budget in terms of how much revenues as well as the debt authorization. That's the primary role of that. So the board is established through executive order, which is meaning at a county executive's discretion in terms of both the size and also the members. And by the way, the executive order for fiscal 22 was just finished, so we're going to start early. I'm going to talk about that in 1 minute. But in terms of the members there, I think, didn't count it on that, but I think it's 18 to 20 people. This is much bigger than most other local spending affordability committees, which usually have a few to several people. And the reason that it's a little more sizable is because we want to be more inclusive and have a diversified group there. So we have, we really try to have different expertise there represented. We have 2 economists, we have a banker, we have a representative from Chambers of Commerce, from nonprofits, and from Farms Bureau and a couple of other economic sectors. We also have a representative from education entities, which is really a highlight. I don't think a lot of other jurisdictions have that. So we try to have a very diversified, inclusive group and can offer advice. Have a good dialogue on there. By the way, county auditor, actually, Mr. Glandani, as council staff, also serve as advisor to the committee, attend all the meetings together with some other county officials like the CAOs, director of EDA, as well as finance director. So the nature of the board is really try to be a nonpartisan committee, provide good advice, data-based common sense type of analysis. And to serve at the committee, it's obvious it's an honor, but not a privilege because people don't get paid. They just spend extra time working on that, provide advice to the government and county executive. And by the way, it's also not the only mechanism for county executive to seek for advice on budget development. As you all know, that every year we have 2 budget hearings from the county executive. There's also a few from the county council as well there. And also county executive hold multiple town hall meetings with the residents there, and also have meetings with council members, with different organizations to collect input. So this is just one of the mechanism to provide executive advice when it comes to fiscal policy making. We started this early than usual. Historically, the committee doesn't get together until January because the data, as we just talked about, most of the data wouldn't be available until January. And during January, February, meet multiple times and generate a report by March 1st for the county executive. And this year we want to start early because there are a lot of fiscal challenges. So we want to get a chance to kind of share information, gather input, and allow more time to digest information, ask questions, and for discussion. So hopefully it's going to make it even more productive and also to avoid the kind of crunching too much information in a short period of time. So we think it's a good thing, and hopefully give the members more time to kind of warm up and get into the business. The other thing I forgot to mention is that the meetings will be virtual given the current pandemic situation. So good news is they don't have to travel all the way to the county building. A lot of these meetings are early morning meetings, and in winter could be difficult because most members have their own full-time jobs there. So that's why we mostly choose off-hour time for the meeting. So yeah, I think that's just a quick summary. Any question, I'll be happy.
So I have some questions about the history of the Spending Affordability Committee. Do you know when
Sure.
it first began in Howard County? I was also trying to determine whether or not spending affordability committees are required by state law. Is there a state law that says the state will have a spending
I don't think
affordability
so.
committee? And
I don't think
also
the state has
local jurisdictions will too? No?
There's no state law on that. I think it's really up to individual cities and counties to determine whether you have a spending affordability committee.
Each jurisdiction. It's up to
Yeah.
each jurisdiction. Do you know how many local jurisdictions have spending affordability committees?
I don't know.
This isn't a trick question. I'm just curious if you knew. I mean,
but I know for sure.
We were trying to look up
I know,
some of them, and it looked like there were a number of them.
So yeah, I think I really don't know. There are 24 counties on that. My guess is like probably a small portion of them have spending affordability. I think the majority of them don't have. But in terms of big counties, there are some have that. I think Montgomery has it, Prince George's has it, and Anne Arundel has it. I couldn't speak for other counties or cities. I know some of them don't have it.
I think the creation of it in Howard County was by executive order, and it predated Craig, who came in, 2011, 2012. My recollection always was that it was created by the Ullman administration. I don't know if it predates them. That would have been 2006.
That was another question I wanted to ask you, Dr. Sun. Do you know when we first started convening the Spending Affordability Committee?
I need to go back and check. So sorry about that, but I'll check and then I'll get back to you.
But you think, Mr. Youngman, that we started it in 2006 during the Ullman administration?
I think it was before. I know it was before 2011. I don't know how much before that, but I thought it was Ken, which would have made it between 2006 and 2011. But that's that last part's a guess.
So
Yeah, I know it's established in executive order, but I don't recall when that started. But I'll happy to research and get back to you.
Okay, yeah, I would like to have some background on when it was first started. And
Councilman Chair Young.
yes,
Hi, Ed Schulter, Deputy County Auditor. We have spending affordability reports in our files back to FY05.
pretty good. I'm impressed. You were pretty, yeah. FY 2005, okay. So for 15 years. They've had spending affordability committees. Yes. So the spending affordability advisory committee, Dr. Sun, what would you say their primary purpose is? I mean, I get the impression that they look primarily at capital projects and debt service, and then how those projects could impact the operational budget. Is that how you would characterize the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee?
The primary task for the committee is to generate the reports and to the county executive by March 1st. We usually have a few components. One is preliminary revenue projections. The other is recommended debt ceiling for the new debt authorization for GeoBond. And also, the committee usually asks to provide the preliminary multi-year projections and talk about a multi-year outlook. So I think that's the major task. And any other major issues they see or recommendations related to the fiscal planning.
And I assume that they get the preliminary revenue numbers from you, Dr. Sun?
From my office, yes.
From your office, right.
But we don't always go with what budget office provided there. In some years, based on the discussion of the committee, they sometimes endorse that, sometimes make changes there based on their read of the economy and a lot of other.
And what would they use, if they didn't take the preliminary revenue numbers from your office, what would they use to come up with different numbers? What types of information would they use?
Again, every year is different, but I remember there was 1 year because of the economy, there was a lot of concerns about economic outlook. So folks are kind of discuss about the presentation by economists about different people regarding the huge uncertainty of the history. So I think there was at least one time in my time here, they adjusted down slightly, I think. But all other years, again, I can only speak to my time here.
Right.
They go with the budget office projection.
And they also go about recommending the debt ceiling, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So last year, the committee indicated that that a key capital budget affordability indicator pertaining to debt service as a percent of the current revenues was expected to exceed the policy target of 10% in FY 2022 through FY 2030. Is that still on target? Is that projection still correct?
Two things. One is that we haven't updated that. Again, as I said, January, February, that's the time that we have the data to make projections and update, and we'll bring back to the Spending Affordability Committee. So that was based on the best of knowledge at that point. So again, if revenue change, if that number changed, then that all going to play a role on the new information. We don't have it now, but by early next calendar year, we will have updates. A second thing is, I think, Terry, you just mentioned the committee's recommendations, whether they always endorse what the budget office or finance office provided there. What I want to say that this is independent group, so they have their own independent thinking, and so sometimes they happen to agree, sometimes they don't necessarily agree with what the government have. For example, the debt last year, I think the group was recommending $70 million on that, which is lower than what the government has been using in the last several years or originally assumed going forward on that. Again, that's part of the value, and that's why we really appreciate it as government that it's a group of very talented, skillful people, and they kind of get together and look at the data, come up with their own recommendation. Again, the government may or may not agree on that, but it's very, very valuable and provide a lot of important, add a lot of important input to the whole fiscal planning
So,
development.
Dr. Sun, did you disagree with that? Did you disagree that um, that this number, that the affordability indicator pertaining to debt service would exceed the policy target of 10%? Do you think that it won't?
No. The percentage calculation was actually based on what was calculated at that point. But again, I was not talking about the percentage. I was talking about total debt amount ceiling at that point.
And the report last year warned that the county debt capacity was depleted and that requests for capital funding were more than double the affordable level. Did you agree with that?
That has been changed. What the report described was historically what happens, and that's not exactly what's happening. What the report said is that the CIP in the future years beyond immediate upcoming fiscal year historically has been more than a few times affordable level, which is true. This county was very unique, I should say that, for many years, decades, that the upcoming fiscal year CIP reflect the true reality or close to reality, but future years is to some extent reflect the wish list rather than the fiscal reality, because the aggregate amount it could be a few times what that means 300, 400% of what reality or affordable level. And the last 2 years, the government has made tremendous effort. And I think between county executive and county council should both take credit, because last 2 years in a row, this situation changed dramatically. As of FY21 approved budget shown, future years GO bond is largely in line with historical level, which is huge progress. I think both the county executive and the county council should be proud of that. But what the committee described at that point is historically what happened and what should be avoided going forward.
So you're saying that the capital debt that was approved this past year by the county council did not contribute to a problem with the county debt capacity? I'm trying to understand this, because we haven't had an opportunity to look at it and talk to you about this, and you're about to put this committee together again this month. So I'm trying hard to understand what it is we should be looking at as a council when you are reconvening this committee. What are the trends? Where are we at as a county? What are you going to be asking the committee to look at?
Could I just ask a clarifying question before we move on?
Sure.
Thank you. So Dr. Sun, when you're talking essentially about the out years wish list, how it'd be, I mean, it was pretty absurd there. And so, I think it was the first year you guys said in your letter you'd be working to cut down the out years fantasy or wish list or whatever the not based in reality term. And then that is work that you guys will be continuing to do as we see the next capital budget. We will see more realistic out years.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly true. When we talk about the overall scope of CIP, the GO bond, because historically what happens is the first year is maybe 90 million, whatever, close to that, and then future years could be 300, 400 every year going forward. And that situation has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. If you look at last year's approved, the level is coming down to close 90 rather than it used to be 300 plus million a year for future years. That's why I was thinking that between the elected officials there, together with staff, had made a huge progress in making the whole long-term planning more of a true reflection of fiscal reality. Obviously, it's still subject to annual review and changes there, but it's a huge step forward.
Well, it's really frustrating for residents because most people are not looking at every single project in the budget, like the or six of us here. They're looking at their project that's really important to them, and then they see it's been pushed out to the next year, and they think, oh, it'll happen next year, but that has been more of a holding place, I would say, in the past. So I know it's hard because everybody wants what they want, but I appreciate the realistic outlook.
Thank
So-
you.
And thank you for that clarity. I'm good.
Thank you. Do you know if the target, the policy target of 10% of debt service as a percent of current revenues will be exceeded by the new cultural center project or any of the other anticipated projects, and how it will affect the county's ability to issue general obligation bonds for maintenance and renovation of existing facilities and school construction, Ellicott City flood mitigation projects, HCC projects, et cetera?
We will provide updates by January, February time, so I really don't have any data at this point.
You haven't looked at that to follow what's
Yes,
happening
because
on a
it's based on
month-by-month?
revenue projections and based on debt projections there. We're still in the process of collecting input from all entities, including education entities, our own agencies, about what they need for next year. And we are also in the process of developing revenue projections, which is another part of the calculation, because we're talking about debt service as a percentage of revenues, right? So the revenue information is also not available. So we are still in the process of making all those updates there. And these data wouldn't be available until January, February-ish, and even at that point, it's preliminary, but at least we will have something to share. At this point, unfortunately, I don't really have a data to share at this point.
So I do want to ask another question about the NCC and whether the general obligation bond debt that is supported by these fees and lease payments will be subject to the spending affordability guidelines this year. I know they weren't last year, but we've had a lot of discussion about the NCC in the meantime, the new cultural center. And I'm wondering if you will be bringing that project before the spending affordability advisory committee.
So because this is one of the CIP projects on that, so if time permits, we will try to include that in the schedule as well. I think it's already planned to. But anyway, in terms of the debt calculation, the design or intention was the whole new cultural center are supposed to be supported, the debt service supposed to be supported by designated revenue. So that's mean tax incremental area, the incremental tax set aside, the revenue, additional revenue collected from that area after paying the TIF bonds there. So that's part of that. The other one is some program revenue was projected when a new culture center is open. That will be used to pay the debt service as well. So the original model and multiple variations was pointing out that those revenues will be sufficient, should be sufficient to cover the debt service. So in other words, that would not add to the debt service payment in the general fund apart on that. So to that extent, it should not be included in the calculation in the debt indicator, as Chair Young mentioned earlier. Again, this is keep evolving. There are a lot of new models, and we're still in discussion on that. But that part, I believe, statement should still stay valid. I think that's still correct.
Well, would it be a conservative approach to bring the NCC general obligation bonds before the Spending Affordability Commission, just in the event that the revenue that is projected that will support those general obligation bonds does not come forth? it does not materialize?
I think it's already affecting to some extent because I remember back to the summer and actually even more recent models. There are multiple of them, but the one was shared was already based on discussion with MuniCap. They're already affecting, I think, potential slowdown because of the pandemic and the development, et cetera. So I believe that's already reflected the conservative approach.
So you would not recommend then bringing those general obligation bonds for the new cultural center before the spending affordability advisory committee?
No, as I said, we plan to include that.
So you will include them?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
We will include that in the discussion. Sorry for didn't make myself clear. No, we plan to include that in CIP discussion.
Okay, so that would be part of the overall calculation then that you're looking at when you're...
The calculation is different because calculation, you're talking about general fund revenue. And this debt, because they have a designated revenue, these designated revenue are not part of general fund. So the debt indicator you mentioned earlier there, we believe is not applicable for this because these have, essentially they have separate stream of revenue to cover those debt service on that. So that's why they're not supposed to add to the overall, the debt indicator we mentioned earlier. But that has nothing to do whether we bring them to the discussion. We plan to include that and plan to talk about that with the Spending Affordability Committee because this is one of the capital project I think is worth discussion, and as you rightly pointed out.
Right, but you didn't bring the new cultural center last year to the Spending Affordability Committee. Is that correct?
I couldn't recall, honestly. I thought we did probably. But last year, again, as we said, in January, February, there were so many meetings. A lot of times speakers were only allowed to talk very fast and only be able to take one or two questions there. So I'm sure there's plenty of discussion there. But that's part of the reason we want to add more meetings there to allow time to digest into some of the important information for clarification, for discussion, for communication, for analysis.
Yeah,
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Yes, go ahead.
So I don't think I've ever asked this before, or we've ever talked about this before. So let's say you have, debt service that's going to be supported within a fund, but the county's still on the hook if that fund revenue proves to be insufficient. So then it's going to spill over into the general fund. It's almost sort of like a loan guarantee or a contingent liability. How does spending affordability look at or evaluate sort of the risk of all the different bonds we have out there that are GO bonds with a dedicated funding source, but evaluate the risk in that funding source and what may end up spilling into the general fund? Or do they look at that at all?
Okay, there are a couple of points. One is that there are always risks, right, as everything else on that. Even general fund's own revenue, future years, they could be different from what was projected originally, given time. I think New Cultural Center is not alone. There are other sources like that there.
Right.
The few thing is, number one, they do have their own stream. So in general, the source, designated source, is going to be the source that's going to be used to cover the debt, not spill over to general fund. Second thing is, I think what you mentioned that is they could be, could use scenarios on that, but sometimes it's a little hard to make up those scenarios on that. You're saying if things change by so and so, what is going to happen on that? That's always the risk on that there. But in general, we are pretty much limited to the original source of funding and to wait for it to catch up later. If somehow 1 year or two it's missed on that, then hopefully later years you collect more and cover that. I don't know whether that addresses your question.
It does, even though the county's technically the borrower. I'm envisioning it as, in the case of this, TIF is the borrower, General fund's the guarantor. No, it doesn't go into the general fund, covenants and ratios, but you do need to sort of evaluate that level of risk of whether it's Rec and
Right.
Parks bonds or what it might be, of if it did spill over. And it doesn't sound like the spending affordability gets into that space much. They focus most on general fund stuff.
Right.
Okay.
And also it's kind of hard to make a guess because these are long-term projections when we talk about individual designated source of kind of cash. I think you're basically talking about the cash models. There are numerous cash models for different designated funding that speak a lot to the future uncertainty, right? So some of those, not necessarily what we have that problem now, is more whether 10 years, 15 years down the road, what could happen. But what could happen, there are all kinds of variety of possibilities there. We can obviously run different scenarios, but again, you don't know what scenarios will be materialized. So the spending affordability doesn't normally get into that business on that. And it's also very complex. It's really, really complex.
And with regard to the TIF as the primary source, we rely on MuniCap for the analysis of the safety of that source versus the Spending Affordability Committee to get into that.
Right.
Okay.
And they are the expert, but also a lot of this are, as I said, it's very complex. They have to connect with developers and a lot of other things to make sure they update it based on the latest information. And there's a lot of factors drive into those models.
Thank you.
I have just a few more questions, Dr. Sun. I'm looking at the SAC membership, the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee membership from 2021 and the SAC membership from 2020. And I was wondering, why are some people voting members and why are some people non-voting members? What is the decision-making that creates some people into voting members? And I thought it might have been organizational, and in some instances it does look like it's organizational, but in other instances it's a little hard for me to tell why this person is now voting and somebody else is not. And I guess
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
also curious, why are there so many non-voting members on the committee?
Yeah, it's based on the reasoning that any members that come from or represent organizations that receive funding directly from the county government, then because of potential conflict of interest there, then they are made non-voting members. They will participate in all the discussion and also the report writing, but not cast a vote because there is a potential conflict of interest there if they receive funding directly from the county. That's the main reason now. By the way, I forgot to mention one thing for both the county council and the audience. There is actually the executive order was just made public. So for the spending for the committee, so I believe it's already posted on the website on that.
I'm sorry, your microphone's going in and out just a little bit. So can you start that sentence again?
Oh, sorry about
Forgot to
that. No, I was
mention-
just mentioning that the FY 2022 spending for the committee was actually just established, and the executive order was made public, I believe, this morning. So there should be a link on the website that actually shows that. And another thing I forgot to mention is that the meeting schedule hasn't been fully decided yet because I need to work with all the committee members to make sure that the schedule works fine with them and in terms of the turnout and dates and time, etc. But pretty soon, as soon as we get input from committee members there, then the meeting schedule will be posted online.
So it's also my understanding that the county council has been asked in the past, maybe every year in the past, to suggest one member to put on the Spending Affordability Committee. And this year, at least I was not asked. I don't know if, Mr. Youngman, were you asked for a recommendation? No, and I know Ms. Walsh
We
wasn't.
were not asked 2 years ago. And then we were afforded the opportunity to provide people this past year, or a year ago.
2 years ago.
No, Our first year, because this is our third. Our first year, we were not.
third, right.
Last year, we were.
Yeah.
And there are some issues with that, apparently, so this year,
So.
we're not again.
I was going to ask, yeah, if that has generally been the way in which it was approached in the past, to ask the council members for a suggestion to put somebody on
So-
the committee.
I'll be happy to.
I mean, are you interested in other council members if they were asked, or just a couple?
Oh, well, Dr. Jones,
Because
did you
I-
ask?
I did have conversations about spending affordability committee. Yes, I have.
So you were asked,
So-
and Ms. Rigby, were you asked? I know Ms. Walsh wasn't, so I guess we should go down all five of us, yeah.
I
Yeah.
was not asked, but I'm also not,
You
I
were
don't
not
know if
asked.
this is really, I don't know if this is really worth the discussion at this time.
Well,
And
this is-
it might be better to move on into more substantive matters.
Well, I think
During
that
public
this is,
discussion.
it is substantive for some of us to have
Can
people
I-
who are on the
Can I
committee.
clarify?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I clarify a couple of things there? I'm not sure I provide all the answer, but I will be happy to do what I can. So a couple of things. One is, I think, Chair, you talk about historical practice. Historical practice, from what I learned from my predecessor, is for most plant executives there that has the spending bill committee, they didn't ask the council for appointee. The exceptions, I think, is in Alan Kindleman's administration. I think he did consulted some council members. I think Dr. Ball consulted the council members at least, I think, 2 years on that. The other things I want to mention
Once,
is that
yeah, up to
So-
3 years, yeah.
Well. So there's asking a council member for someone, and there's conversations about spending affordability committees and appointees, and just in general, general thoughts about all of these committees, all of these commissions. So you just have conversations. I think I remember, Ms. Young, just now you said, I was asked. I didn't say that. I said I had conversations about the spending affordability committee.
Okay,
okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. As I said that, I don't believe the county executive officially asked for council member this year for appointee there. But again, as we said earlier, most execs didn't do that. And he actually did, to his credit, he did actually ask the council members at least 2 years already. And some of the
One.
appointees probably still serve at the committee, I think, in next year, because we make limited changes from year to year. But anyway, the committee is established by executive order. So it's at county executive's discretion who he wants to choose. There are so many talented people in this county. I'm actually even 18, 20 people probably. It's a very small sample of all of them. As I mentioned earlier, there's not a privilege to serve at the committee. They're not getting paid, and they are not like, they actually has to spend extra time. And by the way, it's not the only mechanism people can provide input, telling county executive their own advice on the budget. And by the way, as we just talked about, the council staff, Mr. Glenn council auditor, serve at the committee. And also, I think county executive have budget hearings, have town hall meetings, have monthly meeting with individual council members to collect input. There are plenty of mechanisms. This is not the only one that provide input on next year's fiscal planning.
have you gotten in touch with the people who are listed for this year and asked them if they're willing to serve? Or was
The
this
number-
list, was this list published before you actually talked to any of the people who are on the 2021 Spending Affordability Advisory Committee?
Yeah, of course.
You have talked to all the people who are listed here?
I reached out to all of them, yes.
I have something that,
I guess I'm trying to understand why we're discussing this here. Oh, okay. All right. You know what? My little man has kindergarten. Really fast, looking at the agenda. Like I said before, Dr. David Marker is my pick for the redistricting commission. I gotta run. I'll talk to y'all later.
Okay. Bye, Dr. Jones.
So the question you had asked a few minutes ago about the segregation of voting versus non-voting, it was actually a concern that our auditor brought up 2 years ago, and I echoed. And because the purpose of this committee or commission is to recommend an operating budget and capital budget spending level, we thought, I thought, and I agreed with the auditor, that having half the votes in the hands of people whose departments or entities, whether it was school system, library, whatever, directly benefiting from higher levels of spending, didn't make them, didn't make them the technical experts. Like, they were there to provide contextual perspective, but they had some incentive to vote for higher levels of spending than the technical experts would. And I think we're dancing around this issue of who got appointments and who didn't, because while we weren't asked this year, I believe 4 of our 5 appointments were invited back and only 1 wasn't, because there was some failure to accept what the scope of the Spending Affordability Committee's work is to do. And it's not it's a place to work on the spending and the capital spending, the debt raising recommendations for the county, not a place to drive political agendas. And it was a huge distraction last year, and I think that's why we weren't asked again this year. Yet I think that our people were invited back. So
Well, there are actually 3 people who weren't invited back. So
it's just yours and mine that were invited back?
No, apparently the person who I did appoint last year was invited back.
Was,
Yes.
yeah. And
But-
I think the one I was too, because mine was just a financial guy.
But
He
had
wasn't-
I actually been asked, I probably would have suggested somebody else.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see where you're going with it.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
that-
rather than just invite your person back, we should have
right.
asked.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't delineate
I
that.
would have looked for somebody with economic background or somebody who had a background with capital spending and debt service. And I actually do have a few people I know who live in this county who have that experience and who I think would have a lot to offer.
They didn't
on
want to
the-
do it. They didn't want to do it last year.
Oh, they probably would have, but we just didn't have time
Yeah.
to contact that person and see if that person was available, so we suggested someone else.
And mystery solved. Liz Bobo in 1987 created the Bond Affordability Committee, and then in 2008 it was apparently retasked as the Spending Affordability Committee by your old boss, Ken Lambert. So,
There you go.
anyway, thank you,
Thank
Karen.
you, Mr.
Thank you, Karen Knight.
So I did have, I think, just a couple more questions about this. Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Rigby, you had your hand up? No?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you, though.
Okay. I guess one of my main questions really is, I'm not sure if anybody on this committee has that particular background, whether or not there's anybody on this committee who has a background in finance with using capital debt, government bonds, who knows about debt service and these types of ratios. I'm just looking at the list of people who are voting members.
Chair Young?
Yes,
Chair Young?
yes.
I think I just mentioned, sorry if I somehow didn't make myself clear here clearly. We have 2 economists, 2 PhDs in the committee who are dealing with economics. We have 1 banker who's very savvy on that stuff on that. we have multiple people actually with really good data and the business sense on that there. So I'm not sure about like no capacity there. I do think it's very,
Are they
well, some are
familiar?
new members, but in general, I think it's a very knowledgeable group there. And we also have people from different education entities from other places there. I'm sure they all have, they are all productive. They are contributing to the discussion.
And is local government
I appointed-
finance their expertise?
Sorry, I was going to say I had appointed Ellen Flynn Giles last year based on her vast experience with the Board of Education and education construction funding and bonds. And then I know that Mr. Youngman had also appointed someone with financial experience, in addition to, I see Barbara Lawson, Josh Zucker. There are some other people who, Leonardo McClarty, Milton Matthews will have experience. I mean, there is a breadth and depth to the committee.
Yeah, and I think 2 years ago too, if I recall, that Mr. Poignant, who's a banker, was initially not included, and then Holly, you I think had said, hey, we really need him on, and he came on, and he's your vice chair, isn't he? He's been on for a long time too.
Yeah, I don't recall that he was not included. I think he's always included,
Okay.
but you're absolutely right. That he is a very instrumental member, and he is my vice chair also for the coming year. By the way, he's really good representative for the committee. He served under different administration, regardless who is the county executive. He's just really nonpartisan, very knowledgeable, a lot of expertise, and has a lot of fiscal and a data analytical background on that. And that's exactly the people we need and we appreciate a lot. Him and a lot of others in the committee are exactly in kind of function like that. And we really appreciate the in-depth and breadth of the committee members.
Well, I think it might be helpful, and I know that you just got this information out. I think it might be helpful to the county council to get the resumes of the people who are listed here to the county council so that we can at least take a look at their background, especially this year. I think this is going to be a challenging year. I know that you know, Dr. Sun, that it's going to be a challenging year, and I think having people on this committee who have the best possible background to analyze the data and give recommendations will be really useful, because I know that we use those recommendations throughout the budget process, and we look at that report over and over again. So I would appreciate knowing the backgrounds of the people who are on this spending affordability advisory committee.
Chair Young, we don't collect a resume from the committee members.
Do you ask them to do a paragraph about their background, what's related, how they can contribute to this spending affordability advisory committee?
As I said, we don't have the resume from the committee members for FY22. I don't think the committee in the past ever collected resumes for that.
Well, even if it's not a resume, just a paragraph that they could write, or you could write, somebody in your department could write on their behalf that explains their background, I think would be useful.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's all the questions I have. Do you have any more, Mr. Youngman? No? Okay.